Welcome, everybody, back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here on Thursday, January 23, and more news around the NFL today. A lot more, I would say, headlines regarding the entire league rather than just the playoffs. Not so much talk on the weekend matchups. We'll save that all for that was announced yesterday. Also, a lot of talk around the draft, and specifically the Tennessee Titans. What are they going to do with their first overall pick? They're saying a lot, we're speculating a lot, and we're going to do a little bit more of that on today's show. And also, the Associated Press released the finalists for the NFL Honors Award Ceremony that we're going to get into, discuss, and just go over some things regarding who could win some awards and who could potentially be left empty-handed. All that stuff and more coming up on today's show. Make sure to stick around, and also, if you guys are up for it and you guys have any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share during especially these live shows, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insights always provide a great perspective into what you guys are thinking and just what you guys have in mind when we're discussing any of these topics. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on any of the live shows, there's an easy way to do that. Just go ahead and use the Super Chat feature. The Super Chat feature is able to be accessed by clicking the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. And this way, it guarantees that I'm able to see your message, I'll read it out loud, it gets on the air, and get your guys' thoughts on anything we're discussing on the live show. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, hit the Super Chat button, get involved, and let us know what's on your mind anytime we're doing these shows. So with that out of the way now, we could start with some of the biggest piece of news that we had recently, or really just yesterday, where there's been some more movement in the upstairs portion of these organizations, for a lot of organizations obviously hiring their general managers and whatnot and head coaches and things like that. But the latest one was the Jaguars officially announcing yesterday that they will be parting ways with their general manager, Trent Baalke. This puts an end to a 4-year run for Trent Baalke in Jacksonville, where the team had one playoff appearance, saw Urban Meyer get fired, now Doug Peterson get fired, and a total of a 25-43 record since Trent Baalke was hired, again, in 2021. And before that, he spent 6 years with the San Francisco 49ers, and he was actually part of a Super Bowl run there as well, but not the same level of success for, I'm sure, a couple reasons in Jacksonville. But what's strange really about this decision overall, and why I thought it was just odd, the timing, and just for it to just be announced, where because of the timing and the chain of events, really, because I'll break it down for you guys, was that the timing of it with Baalke being fired now was weird, because at the end of the season, where really nothing went right for the Jaguars and Doug Peterson was on the hot seat and he ended up getting fired, a lot of people thought that it was strange that they were also going to keep Trent Baalke, because Trent Baalke was there for even longer than Doug Peterson, and it's not like they were extremely, better off before Doug Peterson got there. It was almost much of the same, and through another rough period with another head coach, people just thought the Jaguars were going to clear house, that they were just going to move on and restart everything with a new general manager and a head coach, like a lot of the organizations have done. But their owner, Shad Khan, said that he was against doing that, because he said it was like shooting yourself in the foot by overhauling the team like that. And not only that, but not only was that like, all right, like you can believe that, but what made it even more weird and a little bit awkward was, I don't know if I was one of the few that saw this interaction, where a couple weeks ago, the Jaguars owner, Shad Khan, basically was on a Zoom call with media members, just doing sort of a gathering, answering some questions, and the general manager, Trent Baalke, was also in this meeting, and they asked Shad Khan basically if he would be influenced by any new coach whether or not to move on from Trent Baalke, or whether or not a new head coach could potentially influence his decision to move on from Trent Baalke and maybe like fire him, obviously, right? And Shad Khan, in that same moment where he was in the presence of his general manager, who he just said he was going to keep, he said that basically if it meant a new coach getting there and it was somebody they were after, he would have no problem moving on to a new general manager if that was the case. Again, with Trent Baalke just sitting there, and it was a very awkward moment. If you guys haven't watched the video, just go look it up. You'll probably easily find it. It's very strange for that to happen, and for him to keep him and then say something like that, already it looks off, right? It's not the kind of relationship I guess you want in an organization. And while that didn't necessarily pan out like that, and while it didn't come down to the head coach basically because they're still struggling to find one, we talked yesterday about Liam Cohen, the Buccaneers offensive coordinator, and he was looked at as a favorite to land the Jaguars head coaching position, right, this offseason, and all of a sudden he pulls away from that and decides, you know what, I'm just going to stay in Tampa Bay and be the offensive coordinator here, and he was probably going to sign a multi-year deal there, to stay in Tampa Bay. People thought it was weird. Why would he pull out? We've never really heard that this offseason, at least in any of these head coaching opportunities. So for Liam Cohen to just say, you know what, take me out of the list, I'm good in Tampa Bay, was weird. And so instantly people connected it to Trent Baalke still being there, right? So I imagine in a state of desperation, seeing Mike Vrabel get hired, Ben Johnson get hired, Aaron Glenn get hired, all signing elsewhere, and then your main candidate says, I'm good, you guys could look somewhere else, I want to stay in Tampa Bay. That, to me, led to the Jaguars making this move. And now the Jaguars need a new general manager. They obviously need reinforcements on their roster, and they find themselves going back to step one, and now they're going to be on their fourth head coach since Trent Baalke was there, and since they selected Trevor Lawrence back in 2021 as well. So in the end, it was like the overall decision to fire Trent Baalke, I thought was what needed to happen. I didn't really understand keeping him to start this whole thing, but I felt like they waited too long now. Now it looks to me like it was rushed. It was panicked. It was, just a desperate move for them, seeing everybody else get hired. So maybe they finally came to the realization that maybe the relationship with Trent, maybe people are put off by that opportunity. We're speculating, obviously. Maybe they figured, maybe let's just part ways with him, right? Maybe they picked up the hint and they said, you know what, Trent, we appreciate everything you've done. We're going to go our separate ways. And then lo and behold, today, the craziest thing I just got a couple minutes ago was that now, all of a sudden, after Trent Baalke's fired yesterday, now Liam Cohen is meeting with the Jaguars face-to-face, and he and the Jaguars are deciding whether or not he wants to be the head coach again, right? The day after the general manager's fired, now Liam Cohen comes back to the Jaguars and says, you know what? Let's talk about that head coaching position again. Maybe I'm interested now. What changed? Obviously, Trent Baalke left. And it's kind of nuts that happened so quickly like that. You couldn't make it more obvious. And I guess they're fortunate in that sense, right? If they do end up signing Liam Cohen as their new head coach, which would be the craziest just switch of events there. But they would be dodging a bullet, but still, I can't take my mind away from how this kind of looks on the organization, the instability, the impulsiveness of this decision right from the top with their owner. Just not really having a steady, flow to this organization, and still looking for a direction to go, right? It feels like they're just kind of treading right now on water, and they don't really know where they're going. They're just kind of basing it off of a sudden feel, and that's really something that I would imagine nobody really wants, or not too many people want to be a part of, especially with paying Trevor Lawrence all that money. Now he's going through so many head coaches, and you can't really expect to win like that. And now they're going to try and have the reset button again and look for a new general manager now, so they're already going to be late to that party. And lucky that Liam Cohen is coming back to talk with them, but they're already showing up late or not late, but just they've missed out on other candidates that they probably would have been interested in if they had fired Trent Baalke before. So this entire situation, I think, just the right decision. Not ideal for Trevor Lawrence and the product on the field, but it was what needed to happen. And hopefully the Jaguars can just kind of decide on a new head coach. Hopefully it's Liam Cohen, and find a new general manager and stop kind of making these rash decisions just out of nowhere, because they've been pretty up and down recently. You don't want to just throw away a talent like Trevor Lawrence and continue to waste his very important developmental year. So I think really that's the biggest part. But this whole fiasco with Trent Baalke and Liam Cohen saying no and now coming back a day later, very, very strange. But it's you couldn't make it more obvious, right? What the problem was, I guess, what was driving everybody away in Jacksonville after what Liam Cohen did. So we'll see. Maybe tomorrow we're going to get the news and we'll talk about it even more. But for right now, that's the latest development in Jacksonville. They are going to be looking for a new general manager after all. But we're going to go back to a previous segment that we talked about yesterday. More on Aaron Glenn and him being hired as the Jets' new head coach. I got 3 things here that I am looking forward to see how Aaron Glenn addresses during his first year as a head coach. Kind of like a to-do list of what he needs to address and really take advantage of and get the best out of in his first year as head coach to get the Jets back on the beaten path as soon as possible. So we're going to get to that as soon as we return from this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
So we are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk a little bit more about Aaron Glenn and him being hired as the new Jets head coach for 2025 on a 5-year contract. I believe is big news, is great news for, all the New York Jets fans and the city. Now that they, got past this first major hurdle by finding themselves a head coach in Aaron Glenn, and what better than it seems like their top candidate to come in and be their head coach, and someone that already had a prior relationship with them as a former player, being a Pro Bowler there. It's as an ideal situation as you can find, really, and it's something that the Jets, I think, desperately needed. Having somebody in there that knows what it's like in that building, right? Through maybe some of the chaos, some of the good as well in that organization, or I should say finding the good in that organization. I think they got the perfect candidate, in my opinion. I'm excited to see him and, in his first year as a head coach. But with that, both Aaron Glenn and the Jets still got a lot of work to do, really a lot to figure out. And I compiled sort of 3 things here that I think Aaron Glenn must check off of his to-do list in his first year, and just as a work in progress, I guess you could also interpret it. But going through the 3 things that I have on here, pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to go through them and just discuss some of the options and I guess, some of the solutions also to some of these issues. So the first one, obviously, to no one's surprise, one of the main things he has to address this offseason especially is Aaron Rodgers. What are we going to do with the quarterback position and specifically Aaron? I think it's important to sort of lay out like a grounds plan, a roadmap, if you will, with Aaron and really the quarterback position in general, because nothing, honestly, has worked at this spot so far, going back to Zach Wilson, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, all these guys. It's not worked out in any sort of resemblance of how it should look like, right? In some other organizations, you see a little bit of something, right? They provide some sort of spark, but with the Jets, it's really not been that clear of a picture in recent year. And now that they brought in Aaron Rodgers, that was expected to be a lot better off, but they ended up winning 5 games this year with him, so obviously everything crashed down on top of them, right? Their whole plan really didn't work out at all. But I think it's not just all on like Aaron was terrible or that he's washed or anything like that. I mean, I thought he put up pretty decent performances towards the end of the year, but of course then, a little bit of that pressure is off and you understand that. But I think with this position in general, right, you kind of got to ask yourself the question of, well, can we get anybody better? Can we just say, you know what, Aaron, there are some doubts about him. We're just going to move on without having a clear and more convincing plan, alternative also apart from Aaron, right? And I don't really think that's the case either with free agency or the draft. They're not really in a position to draft like a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders or anything like that. Are they going to reach maybe for a guy like Jalen Milroe or Quinn Ewers? I hope not in the first round, but those are questions that Aaron Glenn has to answer, and I'm sure he will, gauge Aaron Rodgers' interest for this upcoming year in 2025, because Aaron Glenn, I think I heard it from one of the sources, covering this topic, was that Aaron Glenn wanted Aaron Rodgers to come back, ideally, but it's also, not up to him. Aaron, with his cold relationship with owner Woody Johnson, I think that is also a big factor in his decision. And also, Aaron Rodgers might just decide to call it quits. He might just retire. So for as much as Aaron Glenn would want him to stay, it would also be up to Aaron as well and the owner Woody Johnson. And also, they don't have a general manager right now. So it's not just all up to Aaron Glenn. We'd have to wait a little bit to see who their new general manager will be. And then I'm sure Woody Johnson, Aaron Glenn, and whoever their general manager will be are going to get together and discuss all their options and decide where to go with this position. But, again, it's also part of Aaron Rodgers' decision, and he sort of alluded to the fact that he would have made up his mind whether to come back or retire around March. So it does give the Jets and everyone a little bit of time, but, that's going to be a main thing that the Jets have to address, obviously, to start off this entire process. And then the next thing I wanted to see Aaron Glenn, really address was obviously his coaching staff. And it might seem obvious that that's the case, but I think with the Jets, it's a little bit more significant, I will say, just because, you're assuming that with the fact that Aaron Rodgers, you don't really know if he's coming back or not, that you're going to have to make this decision about the offensive coordinator without, his consultation a little bit, without really his input. You're going to have a coaching staff relatively soon. So you can't just wait on Aaron Rodgers to then start the process. And Aaron Glenn already has some guys in mind. So already that's a good start, because I'm hoping they don't just base it off of the kind of offense that Aaron wants to run. Not that it was just all, that was just all the reason why they were struggling on offense last year, but I think it's time for them to explore other things than just kind of deferring to Aaron Rodgers and his expertise and experience and things like that to kind of run the offense. I think they need a new wave, a new flow of information there on the offensive side of the ball that's maybe a little bit more up to date, just some new ideas to kind of get the best out of the players that they have. So offensive coordinator is going to be a huge role for this Jets team, considering that Aaron Glenn is more of a defensive guy. He was a defensive back. He's coached on primarily the defensive side of the ball. So he's going to be more involved on that side. So the offensive coordinator is going to have a massive role in how this offense looks and how it ultimately looks and produces on Sundays. And some guys have already been named, like Clint Kubiak for the Saints this past season. He did a pretty decent job, I would say. Scott Turner in Las Vegas, Thomas Brown in Chicago. Looked like he was doing a pretty decent job before he was named interim head coach. But the favorite so far, according to a couple of these reports, is Nick Caley, the Los Angeles Rams passing game coordinator. And every offseason, kind of a side note, everybody just goes and picks off from the Rams coaching staff. You know, they'll pick off a disciple of Sean McVay, someone from his coaching tree, and it always feels like that's the main attraction each offseason for someone to go look for a head coach, coordinator, or anything. Let's go shop at the Rams coaching staff and see if they have any. It looks like Nick Caley is one that is very much appreciated in New York, but still nothing has been finalized, obviously, and they're obviously going to be calling the plays, I think, in this scenario for the Jets. So that's also pretty exciting just because of the fact that, again, going back to that Aaron Rodgers point on him running his offense and whatnot, I think having an offensive coordinator be sure of what kind of offense he wants to run, and if the Jets are confident in that, I think that would bring another source of excitement for this Jets team, that it's not just going to look like the same old just because Aaron Rodgers comes back. You could have the best of both worlds if you have Aaron Rodgers and if he's open to really learning a new offense under some guy that maybe he's never worked with before. So hopefully, that's best case scenario. But not only the offensive coordinator, but also the defensive coordinator will be important because Aaron Glenn, you'd think, would be calling the defense, but in that same breath, calling plays and just focusing on simply calling your side of the ball is a lot more, I guess, straightforward is the word I'm looking for, rather than just being the head coach, worrying about a million different things, and also making sure you're calling the right plays. To kind of divide and conquer like that would be ideal. So it would have to be someone that Aaron Glenn is very confident in, is someone that he has total trust in to call the plays, or, in that same breath, he could just call them. It is hard, but Kyle Shanahan does it for the 49ers. So Aaron Glenn is capable of doing it, I'd assume, but that's also a decision that we're going to have to wait and see on how they address it. And guys like Steve Wilks have been mentioned as a potential defensive coordinator, and other guys, on the Jets staff already, and also the Lions staff as well, have been mentioned for other spots on Aaron Glenn's coaching staff as well, but we're still very much in the early portion of it all. So we're going to have to wait a couple days, I'd imagine, to get some news on that. But the last thing that I want to see the Jets address as soon as possible is maximizing the talent that they have on offense. Because it's not like a brand new situation like maybe, say, the Raiders, where they need a new head coach still, where they need a quarterback, they need a running back, they need to address the offensive line, they would love to have some more receivers as well. It's not really that green, right? It's still not really that green. You got something working here in New York with Garrett Wilson, obviously. Whether or not you decide to move on from Devontae Adams, I don't think they will, but you never know. That's also somebody that you could have as part of your offense. Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, these guys, they got some good names and some good players on this side of the ball, and I always felt like this offense should do a lot better than what they were putting out there each and every Sunday, whether or not they started well, but their ending was really bad, or they kicked it into gear too late and it just really was irrelevant at that point. I always thought that they had a lot more that they were capable of than they showed in some of these games towards the end. So whether it's the play calling or, whatever it might be, it's irrelevant now, right? They're too talented to struggle like they did last year. And part of that is kind of reassuring Garrett Wilson to kind of get him to buy in to Aaron Glenn and getting him to see the bigger picture with the Jets. Because last year, you saw a lot of frustration with Garrett, and there was a lot of talk about him and how he would fit in with Davante Adams, whether he would fall, I guess, out of Aaron's good graces. In terms of needing a go-to play and relying on someone, maybe Aaron Rodgers was too overly favorable to Davante Adams, and Garrett really wasn't feeling that involved. So there was a lot of that kind of talk last year, and Garrett showing his frustrations a lot more visibly than we're really accustomed to. So that's one of the main things you have to address with Garrett, getting him to buy in, because you don't want him to even think about leaving at any point. So addressing that as part of this last thing, and I mentioned Glenn, or I guess maybe Ben Johnson, right? Technically, directly, but those two guys have a lot of potential to them, especially Breece Hall. I think this year was a very lackluster and disappointing year for him, for whatever the reason may be, but they're both very talented. They showed spurts in different moments throughout the year that you could get excited about. So making sure that they're involved a lot more is going to be huge, and I think it should be significant to what their plans are on this offense. And, the last thing is just their offensive line, which got better, but I still think they need to fine-tune some things as well. So that all goes into just maximizing everything that they have on offense, and I think they're right there. They're hanging around the rim, if you will, and it just takes a little bit of guidance and direction and a lot of repetition to get this, to look a lot better. But they got the pieces. They know which way they're supposed to be facing. It's just a matter of getting it in the hole now and, just maximizing it, right? I think that's the optimal word to use here. But those are just some of the things that Aaron Glenn, I'm sure, is going to have to deal with as he takes on this new challenge in the city of New York, which is very unforgiving as well. So we'll see how Aaron Glenn deals with the pressure as well. Again, very confident in him. I think he's going to do a great job. But speaking about, new opportunities and new beginnings, with the Jets and Aaron Glenn, we're going to shift our focus over to the Tennessee Titans. And they have a great opportunity this upcoming April, selecting with the first overall pick in the NFL draft. And a lot of people thought it was just a foregone conclusion that they were going to draft a quarterback. But in a press conference that was held on Wednesday, maybe those thoughts aren't so clear with what they're going to do with that number 1 overall pick. So there was a lot that was said at this press conference that we're going to get into and get a better idea of what the Titans will and should do with the first overall pick. That is coming up when we return after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, so we're back on here, and I believe this is the first 2025 NFL Draft Talk that we're going to be doing on the Chip Shot Football Podcast, right? We are pretty early into this entire thing, right? We're not really going to dive into best fits or anything like that anytime soon, but I thought this was a great starting spot to where we could start introducing the NFL Draft. And I think there's no better spot to begin than with the first overall pick and the Tennessee Titans, which hold that pick as well. So I think we've been led to believe that a 3-win team is going to select a quarterback because of obviously the struggles of Will Levis. That was actually one of the biggest questions going into this year for me, was how everything around the quarterback position was getting addressed. Everything looked nice. Everything looked exciting. But, you can't forget about Will Levis, right? Having a new system being implemented this past year, again, after learning a whole other one in his rookie season. And I thought that was obviously going to be a big factor in all of this, right? Because you're really not going to go anywhere without your quarterback. And I think this year we saw the negative side of that, right? The struggles, the frustrations you saw with Brian Callahan as well on the sideline. It definitely did not pan out at all for both sides. So immediately you think once the Titans get announced as the number one pick, right away you think guys like Cam Ward from the University of Miami is the favorite right now to land at the number one spot. Or maybe Shedeur Sanders at one point in time, people thought or still think that he should go number one overall. But I believe for most betting sites, right, Cam Ward is the betting favorite as of right now to be the number one pick. But where this thing started to get a little bit interesting was yesterday. There was a lot of movement with the odds on that number one pick, even starting, if you want to go all the way back to Tuesday, right, to kind of give you guys a better understanding of what was going on and why that was, right? Because according to BetMGM, on Tuesday morning, the odds to be the number one overall pick were very much still in Cam Ward's favor, like I mentioned. But Travis Hunter, right, the Heisman-winning player, defensive back, wide receiver, is going to be a great player in the NFL, I believe. He's also up there to be very highly drafted as well. And really nobody has played college football like Travis Hunter has. So maybe in a bunch of other circumstances, Travis Hunter would be the obvious non-question number one pick. But in this year, because the Titans, like we were led to believe, had struggles at the quarterback position, we just thought it's going to be Cam Ward, and number two to the Cleveland Browns is going to be Travis Hunter. But on Tuesday morning, Travis Hunter's odds to go number one overall were at plus 1,500, right? So not the greatest chance. And then you go over to yesterday morning, and Travis Hunter had moved from 1,500 to only plus 625. But Cam Ward was still the favorite at minus 185. But still a pretty decent movement there for Travis Hunter's odds. So people were starting to take notice. And then you just look at a little bit later in the day yesterday, and Travis Hunter then moved from plus 625 to plus 200 yesterday afternoon. And Cam Ward went from minus 185 to minus 115. So both guys moving in opposite directions. And that's a pretty significant jump from one day to the next, one morning to the next afternoon, to go from plus 1,500 if you're Travis Hunter to plus 200. Something obviously happened in that time for there to be such a major change in the odds. And what that was most people, I'm sure by now, have seen or have heard about the Titans' introductory press conference for their new general manager, Mike Borgonzi. Mike Borgonzi will be their new general manager, and he had his intro press conference yesterday. And he was asked a lot about, obviously, the projection and the future of this franchise. And during that introductory press conference, their president of football operations for the Titans, Chad Brinker, said something that got a lot of people's attentions and, can lead you to believe why the odds changed a little bit. And he said on the number one pick and what their plans are going to be with that pick, he said, "We won't pass on a generational talent with the first pick in the NFL draft. They're going to be doing all their homework on all of the prospects, including quarterbacks." And he also mentioned how they have a term for these generational players as blue players, that anytime you have an opportunity to be in the range where you can get one of those blue players, as they call them, that it was going to be extremely hard for them to pass up on that opportunity. And, you can easily connect the two dots, right? You can easily connect how labeling someone as generational, as a game-changing blue player, as they called it. Two positions, Travis Hunter playing two positions and really playing it at a level that not a lot of people have seen in the last part of, I don't know, like 5 years, I guess I would say, as a general statement. You can easily connect the dots there and see how he's probably obviously talking about Travis Hunter. I don't know how else to say it besides, just directly saying it. And they could deny it. They could just say that that's subjective, right? They could look at a quarterback as a generational type of player. It doesn't necessarily have to mean Travis Hunter would be their standpoint. But I don't think too many people are high on these two quarterbacks as much as they are on Travis Hunter, obviously, with what he's been able to do not only this past season, but the season before that, and their impact on the University of Colorado as well. He was a major, major component of that as well. So, I mean, if Tennessee, in their own mindset, thinks that one of these quarterbacks fits the term generational player more so than Travis Hunter, then I think they got more problems coming down the road. So, to me, it seems like an obvious connection, and that's why, obviously, it feels like the odds have shifted so much by their president of football operations, Chad Brinker, saying something like that, because, the struggles of Will Levis and the whole idea around these NFL teams now and just playing good football in the NFL is that you have to have a quarterback, right? Being any sort of sense of relevant, you need to have a good quarterback, especially playing in the AFC South, where the main guy is CJ. And if anybody else could just get their guy and get them to play very good football, I believe they could compete in that division right away. I don't think the Titans are too far from that being a reality. But that's why you need to figure out the quarterback position. But does that necessarily mean you should pass up on Travis Hunter just because you need a quarterback? And that seems to be the question right now. And, their new general manager, Mike Borgonzi, also mentioned his thoughts on the number one pick and sort of addressing the quarterback position as well in this statement that I have up here for you guys to see. He said, "We're keeping an open mind on this, but the quarterback is the most important position in sports, so you have to solidify the quarterback position. We're going to turn over every rock, whether that's free agency, draft, or we have quarterbacks on the roster here. We're going to give him every opportunity to play and to compete." So he seems like he knows the magnitude of this decision. He knows that you're not going to be in any sort of relevant category in terms of your football team or meaningful football without a quarterback. And, the emphasis he's putting on it seems to be aligned with what I'm thinking. But it's obviously going to be a massive decision, and I have no problems with them and what Mike Borgonzi said in his statement, because I believe you'll have, like, my feeling around this is that I feel like you'll have more regret passing on Travis Hunter than you would either of Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, right? I feel like deciding to just go with the quarterback because you need a quarterback in this draft specifically with these guys and, the projections around them and their career trajectories and things like that and their scouting reports and everything that people have on them. I think based on that and how this draft class with quarterbacks isn't necessarily the strongest one we've seen over recent years, definitely not as strong as last year's, I think that would give me more reason to go with a more surefire player like Travis Hunter, who could instantly put on a Tennessee Titans uniform and be the face of that team for as long as he might be there, right? As soon as that pick goes through, no one's really going to feel like, oh, did we make a mistake? Because I feel like his floor is one of the highest floors, maybe the highest floor that you have out of any players in this draft. And I don't think that the Titans would feel any sort of regret because they're going to get a great player regardless. And it might not be the quarterback position like obviously there's a huge emphasis on, but I don't think you just fill it just for the sake of filling it, right? If that makes sense. You don't just take a quarterback and select one just because everyone's saying that you need one. You need to get a quarterback soon. You need one. When are they going to get one? You don't want to be like the Giants in a sense, right? No offense, but drafting a quarterback 6th overall and Daniel Jones where he shouldn't have been drafted just because you need one, you see where they are right now, and that's where, that's only one example of it. But yeah, I just don't think you just do it based on need, unless, this draft class is obviously filled with great prospects, a lot of guys that you can pick from. Then I think it would be a little bit foolish to go away from that, especially because they do have playmakers. But because of the context of this year's draft, and it feels like there's a lot of great players in a lot of different positions, and you could have the possibility of grabbing the most talented, the most versatile out of the entire class, I think this decision kind of makes itself up just by considering all those factors. And if you evaluate them and you don't think it helps as much as Travis, just don't settle for a quarterback just for the sake that you need a quarterback, right? And you're feeling pressure from the outside media or the fans or anything like that, then if you're feeling that and you base your decision off of that, then I think you're not cut out for the job. I think that's why they take so much time in hiring the guys that they do, because they feel that they're the best evaluators of it, right? If not, then they would ask the public who they want to draft, right? So, I don't know. I think especially because if you don't know if you'd get drastically better with a quarterback, you would just take the best player available, and I'm not sure you're going to get that much better with Cam Ward on your team or Shedeur Sanders on your team than you would with Travis, right? So in that case, with a higher floor from Travis Hunter, I think I would go with him just over the other quarterbacks. And I mean, in free agency, or if you decide to stick with Will Levis, I think you're not going to be moving too much. So I would rather feel more confident and comfortable getting a guy like Travis Hunter on my team, having him change the face and the notoriety with that organization, if at all anything. So those are kind of my thoughts on it, on what to do with the number 1 overall pick. And like I said before briefly, I think with the AFC South, I don't think you need like this super team that you have all the best receivers, the best quarterback in the NFL. I think in this division, with the Colts kind of being in a weird spot, the Jaguars being a mess, and the Texans, making the playoffs but not necessarily looking overpowered, if you could have a player like Travis and maybe you get an overperformance from a free agent signing or something like that with a veteran quarterback, I don't think you're that far off if you're the Titans. And maybe I was a year early on my prediction being so high on the Titans, but it's just because I believe that they have a talented team and they have a lot of good players, and they're just, again, kind of hanging around the rim a little bit. They just need to find their guy, and maybe it's not this year, but I think they would take a big step back if they didn't decide to draft Travis Hunter and go somewhere else. That's just me, though. Still a long ways away from it, but those comments were certainly interesting to kind of hear and see how people reacted to it as well. But we got a couple more segments to get to, more reactions coming up in the next segment on the Associated Press NFL Honors finalists, right? They announced all the finalists for all the awards, and there's a couple interesting ones, a couple guys that were left out, and maybe some guys that are finalists might not be walking away with anything after that award ceremony. So we're going to give our thoughts on it and just talk about everything that we learned from the Associated Press's finalists for the NFL Honors Awards.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
So guys, we got news today, this morning actually, that the Associated Press released their finalists for their NFL Honors Awards, and instead of there being 3 finalists, they gave a list of 5 finalists for each award. And we'll know the winners and everything like that on February 6th when the ceremony is held. And, all the votes, I'm almost certain, are already in. So, they have the answers, I'm sure, and they have everything, accounted for. But they decided to release the finalists based on the votes given by the media members that are associated with the Associated Press. So I decided to go through each of them and just give my thoughts on them, because a couple of them, they are as advertised, given the guys that are the finalists for. So there's not a lot of surprises in a couple of them, but they are certainly a couple of, how you would say, potential for some mix-ups, potential for some, bad looks, I guess you could say, for some of these awards. And, it starts no further than the MVP award. And the finalists for this award are Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Saquon Barkley, and Jared Goff. And I think, Allen, Lamar, Saquon, I think those guys, even Joe Burrow, I think all those guys were pretty obvious and easy nominees. I was a little surprised by Jared Goff, to be honest with you, because I know he had that crazy completion, record, or crazy completion streak going on really during the middle part of the season to the beginning part of the season. But I don't know. I felt I was just a little taken back by Jared Goff being there. I thought they'd have somebody in there like, I don't know, like Derrick Henry. I wouldn't have been mad also with Jamar Chase in there. I thought he was just as important to that team, or as close as anybody was to Joe Burrow in terms of importance to that team and the amount of contribution they had to one certain team, right? So I just wasn't expecting Jared Goff, but regardless, I think really what we know is it's probably going to come down to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And what's interesting about the MVP award is that it really connects to the Offensive Player of the Year, because with the MVP, you usually think that it's going to go to a quarterback, right? So already you think Saquon's not going to win this award, but based on the year that he's had, he was also nominated for Offensive Player of the Year, and he's a finalist just as well as Joe Burrow is a finalist for MVP and Offensive Player of the Year. Same thing with Lamar. He's also a finalist for Offensive Player of the Year and MVP as well. And the two differences in this award is that Jamar Chase is a finalist and Derrick Henry is also a finalist for Offensive Player of the Year. And it's crazy to think that a quarterback and a wide receiver are on the finals list for MVP and Offensive Player of the Year and still no playoff success, right? Obviously talking about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and the kind of insane seasons that they had. Jamar Chase, like I just finished saying, could very well be in the MVP finals list, but he obviously wasn't voted into that. So for him to be in the Offensive Player of the Year, and along with Derrick Henry, Lamar, Joe, and Saquon, this award is going to be super interesting to see who ends up winning. Because the MVP, I think we've all been pretty clear that it's probably going to be Josh or Lamar. And say Lamar wins this award, he's probably not going to win Offensive Player of the Year. So out of Joe Burrow, Saquon, and Jamar Chase, who gets selected, right? If you go with, let's say, Saquon, right? Because he broke 2,000 yards and he's been phenomenal all year. Well, then Jamar Chase isn't nominated for any other award on here. He's not nominated for anything else. So are you not going to give an award to the guy that won the Triple Crown this year? That seems a bit like crazy, right? It seems nuts for Jamar Chase to end up with no award. It would be pretty ridiculous. But you could also say the same for, I don't know, if Lamar for some reason doesn't end up winning MVP and that goes to Josh, then you would think the kind of season that he had, he would win Offensive Player of the Year. But then it would be the same case, right? Then what do you do with Saquon and what do you do with Jamar, right? Are they not going to get anything? So it's kind of dicey a little bit, right, with how they're going to decide these finalists and everything like that. And it's also like interesting to follow along as well. But, Offensive Player of the Year and MVP are very much, intertwined with the kind of crazy season that we had on the offensive side of the ball with a lot of the guys, performing at the highest level. Defensive Player of the Year should be a little bit easier. I mean, the finalists for Defensive Player of the Year are Zach Bond, Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson, TJ Watt, and Pat Surtain. I like that Zach Bond was nominated. Zach Bond really broke out in a major way this year for Philadelphia, and he's one of the main reasons that I believe they are so good. A lot of the attention for, I think, the general fan goes to Jalen Carter or, Jalen Carter or Darius Slay as like the main names to know on that defense. And also a little bit, I guess you could think of Josh Sweat because he's been there a lot, or Quinyon Mitchell, the rookie that's looking like he has a very exciting future ahead of him and things like that. But Zach Bond really has been a great addition to this team. He's everywhere on that football field. He creates turnovers. He's a sideline-to-sideline kind of linebacker, and he's just like an eraser, basically. He erases run plays. He erases guys in coverage over the middle of the field. He does a lot for this team, and I'm really glad to see him on this list. But in terms of overall, who would end up winning this award, I think it's pretty close because it does usually end up going to the guy with the most sacks, and that would be Trey Hendrickson. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like any of these guys could win it. I would give my vote to Trey Hendrickson, though, because he was clearly the best and only thing that Bengals defense had going for them this year, in my opinion. So he can, just so I would see somebody else win it. But that one's a pretty close one as well. I already mentioned Offensive Player of the Year. Then we got Offensive Rookie of the Year, and the finalists are Brock Bowers, Jaden Daniels, obviously, Malik Neighbors, Bo Nix, and Brian Thomas Jr., excuse me. So what's interesting about this list is that it's very heavily based on LSU, right? Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, Jaden Daniels, all guys that were drafted from LSU this past spring, and now they're dominating as soon as they step into the NFL, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but it is kind of pretty interesting how all three of them in just their first years have taken over their cities, their franchises already, with Brian Thomas having a major impact in Jacksonville, Malik Neighbors, same thing, same level of impact in New York, and Jaden Daniels, right? Really taking over the entire NFL because he's still playing, and he's having one of the best rookie seasons arguably ever in the NFL. So I think this award is pretty self-explanatory. It's definitely going to go to Jaden Daniels just based on the season that he's had, reinforced even more by how he's performing in the playoffs. But the votes don't go into the playoffs, unfortunately. But anyway, it still was going to be Jaden, and he's doing a phenomenal job. And it's only year one, which is the crazy part. So I think this one was pretty much given out by week 12, I would say. Brock Bowers also would have been a heavy favorite for me, but you can't argue too much with what Jaden Daniels has done. So Jaden's going to win this award, I would say. For Defensive Rookie of the Year, it's also pretty close. The nominees, or the finalists, I should say, were Cooper DeJean, Braden Fisk, Quinyon Mitchell, Chop Robinson, and Jared Verse. And it's funny also looking at this list, and you look at DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, Braden Fisk, and Jared Verse, all guys that were drafted round 1 and round 2 by their respective teams, and they just finished playing each other this past, play a big role in their respective positions on their teams. So great drafting by the Rams and by the Eagles. But overall, I think it's hard to ignore Quinyon Mitchell because, he's playing very well. And he was my early pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and then it kind of got swayed to Jared Verse. So now looking at it, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I would give it to... I would probably give it, and I think it's going to be given to Jared Verse. I think Jared Verse I think people are more familiar with Jared Verse up until this point, right? Because corners, if you're not really watching them game in and game out, you're not really hearing their name too much, which is a good thing. And Jared Verse, I think a lot of more people know of him, so I'm going to go with him. I think they're going to give him the award, and very deservingly so, as well. Then to round it off here with a couple more awards, the Comeback Player of the Year, we got Joe Burrow, Sam Darnold, J.K. Dobbins, Christian Gonzalez, and Damar Hamlin. And I think just based on the actual criteria of the award and performance this past year, I think this award has Joe Burrow written all over it. He actually got injured and came back from an injury, and he had an insane year. He probably could be a top 2, top 3 finalist for MVP, but I think this award is too obvious not to go to Joe, so I think he's going to win it at the end of the day. Then Coach of the Year, we got Dan Campbell, Kevin O'Connell, Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, and Andy Reid. I think the heavy favorite and someone I'm leaning more towards is probably going to be Dan Campbell. 15-win regular season, domination during the regular season. Pretty fortunate that these votes don't go into the playoffs, because probably he would have taken a big hit from that, and I probably would have given it to Dan Quinn based on the playoff performances, but I'm pretty sure the votes stop at the end of the regular season, so it is probably going to go to Dan Campbell. He defeated Kevin O'Connell. Sean Payton should be given credit as well for drafting Bo Nix and having it all play out as it did, so he's sort of an underrated guy as well for this award, but I think Dan Campbell's probably going to end up winning it based on all the merits in the regular season. And then the last one, the Assistant Coach of the Year, we got Joe Brady, Vic Fangio, Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn, and Ben Johnson. More heavily based in Detroit with Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, so I wouldn't be surprised in this category if it ends up going with Ben Johnson, or my vote, I would go with Joe Brady. I think he doesn't get enough credit for the kind of turnaround he's had with Josh, and Josh deserves a lot of the credit, obviously, on his own, accord and determination to get better, but I feel like Joe Brady's done a phenomenal job as well, and not a lot of people talk about him as much as like a Ben Johnson or other coordinators out there. I think he's kind of overlooked in that sense, and the Bills are arguably going to be playing the Super Bowl potentially, and I think he should be in serious consideration to be a head coach. So for me, it would be Joe Brady, but I think the general feeling is that it's going to be Ben Johnson, just based on the level of attention he's gotten. Again, rightly so, but I think Joe Brady deserves it a little bit more, just in my opinion. But leave your guys' thoughts on, my thoughts on the awards, but also who you guys think is going to win these awards come February 6th when the ceremony is held. But in terms of this show, we got one more segment to get to regarding the Super Bowl, and now, knowing that there's 4 teams left, we're going to be looking at the most exciting potential Super Bowl matchups that we could get in February based on, obviously, the winners and losers. I'm going to rank them from 4 to number 1 at which Super Bowl matchup I'm most looking forward to hopefully seeing when the Super Bowl comes around. So we're going to get to that right after this. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. And obviously with the Super Bowl getting closer and closer, it's going to be here before we know it, especially after this upcoming weekend with the conference championships. I decided to look ahead a little bit, and knowing the four great teams that we have left for Championship Sunday, I was thinking, who would I really like to see move on to the Super Bowl, and what kind of Super Bowl featuring two of these teams would I really be most excited to watch when the big game comes around. So out of the four Super Bowl matchups that we could see, here are my rankings for the ones that I'm most excited and the most hopeful that end up happening for the game in February. And I have it here for you guys to start off with number 4, going from 4 to number 1. Obviously, the one that I guess you could say I'm least likely to be excited over would be the Chiefs against the Eagles. I think it's just the fact that we've seen it already. Not necessarily with Saquon, obviously, but we've seen the majority of these guys playing in this game, right? We've seen Jalen take on Patrick. Travis still there. Nick Sirianni still there. Same thing with Andy Reid. I think it would be a lot of the same guys, right? Same movie franchise, just a different remake or just a sequel to the first one, right? You kind of get a sense of how it's going to end or how it's going to go. And I know Saquon being introduced it's a massive factor, right? It's been the factor for the Eagles, but it was a good matchup last time, and I'm sure it's going to be great again with Saquon there and how the Chiefs decide to attack him and defend him and whatnot. And same thing the other way around, right? For this Eagles defense and trying to get their revenge on the Chiefs, right? Trying to get one back for that Super Bowl they lost as well. And, more on the positive side, I guess you could say, you got talent coming from all directions, right? With the amount of offensive talent and defensive talent on both teams, which should still be like a solid Super Bowl, but it'd be cool to just see one team that's like this is the obvious matchup, I think, right? The favorite in the AFC Championship game and the favorite in the NFC Championship game, they would be playing each other obviously in the Super Bowl. So I'm really looking more for some surprises, right? So that's why I had this one at number 4. Solid, reliable, but you could definitely get better. And at number 3, I thought the Bills and Eagles game would be definitely better than a Chiefs-Eagles rematch per se. These are both teams that just make their entire identity on running the ball. The Bills with their 3 runners and Saquon, the kind of dominant path he's been on, and then you also include the 2 out of the 3 most mobile quarterbacks, right? Josh, Lamar, and Jalen Hurts. You got 2 of the 3 of them playing in the Super Bowl, which should add a whole nother dynamic as well, which would be great to see. I think this would be a game where you would see a lot more action, a lot more big plays potentially through the air, hopefully, because both of them know how important it is to run the ball, and both of them know that's a strength of the other team. So they'd load up the box, they'd put a lot of attention on that, and hopefully you'd see some big plays from Josh Allen, some scramble drills, some miraculous throws. Jalen Hurts hopefully opening up that pass game a little bit more with favorable matchups with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I think this would have a possibility for that, and you get that surprise factor, right? That unexpected Super Bowl member, right? That Super Bowl participant in the Buffalo Bills making their first Super Bowl, or Josh Allen making his first Super Bowl, I should say, and defeating Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes along the way. That's a storyline that I would sign up for right away, right? If Josh is able to beat both Lamar and Patrick and then get to a Super Bowl, then the pressure goes from already like an 8 to like a 15 out of 10, right? Because you've beaten the 2 most, I guess, consistent guys in the playoffs, and 2 out of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. So you would feel like the Bills would have to win this Super Bowl. But are the Eagles really going to lose it with getting this all-star roster together with Saquon Barkley? That sort of narrative and storyline would be awesome to see. And then you incorporate the fact that the Bills are 0-4 in Super Bowls as well, just adding more pressure to it. So I think it would be great to see that. And also, it would be also awesome to see Saquon in his first Super Bowl, right? It can't go without mentioning that. And the possibility of him winning one and rubbing it in the Giants' face would be great to see with how they failed to re-sign him and really not value him in New York. It would be the ultimate revenge and the sweetest of, endings to see Saquon host the Lombardi the season after the Giants were like, is he worth $12 million? Well, he went and won a Super Bowl. I think that would be awesome to see, honestly. And the coordinator battle too, right, with Joe Brady and Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio, and these guys. I think there's a lot of stuff to like about this matchup. But it's not number 2. Number 2, I had the Chiefs against the Washington Commanders. For me, would be super just unexcited, up and down waves of emotions all over this game. Because you got Jaden Daniels starting in his first Super Bowl as a rookie quarterback. And, what he did along the journey also adds to the importance and the significance of the Commanders even potentially being in this situation by, they would have had to have beat the number 3 seed Bucks, the number 1 seed Lions, and the number 2 seed Eagles all on the road. So already, that's way past exceeding expectations, right? They're like 4 or 3 years down the line of where they should be. So for them to be able to do that would be remarkable. And again, Jaden Daniels, rookie quarterback starting in the Super Bowl, would get a lot of headlines, obviously. Dare I say you'd have both of the best quarterbacks from each conference playing against each other in Jaden Daniels and definitely Patrick Mahomes, but I think Jaden's already in that conversation. So you'd have both of the best quarterbacks from each conference, and you'd have the historical aspect of it, right? You'd have the Chiefs chasing a three-peat and the Commanders, making their own history by not only the complete turnaround of this organization, but also, again, the rookie quarterback trying to defeat Goliath, basically, right, in this matchup, right? You have the perfect David and Goliath story in this matchup, which always draws a bunch of eyeballs, obviously. And you, in that same breath, you got Jaden Daniels just carrying the weight of an entire city. If they make this Super Bowl, you'd have so many people believing that they could actually win it, without a doubt, right? And that all that pressure falls on Jaden Daniels, right? They would all these people would believe they'd have a chance because of Jaden and that pressure that he would have to deal with. And if he goes out there and performs extremely well, that just adds a little bit more, right? And you'd have also this new, young, exciting prospect coming into the NFL trying to dethrone the GOAT, potentially, the king, and throw him off his throne would be another great storyline to write about and talk about. So if that's not enough, right, you got a wild card team being in the Super Bowl potentially for the first time since 2020, which would be awesome to see as well, right? A complete underdog and Cinderella story also draws a lot of attention as well. But for as exciting as this one would be, I think the consensus number 1 for a lot of people would be this one right here, the Bills against the Washington Commanders, two teams that you definitely didn't think would be in the Super Bowl. Definitely not the Commanders for the turnaround, like I said, having a rookie quarterback in this situation, but even in a sense, Josh Allen in the Bills, right, moving on from Stephon Diggs. Josh Allen not being able to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, always falling short, and the narrative around the Bills organization just in general, right, always being one step away from glory, right, losing all 4 Super Bowls in 4 consecutive years is insane, with the kind of bad luck that's been tied with this organization. But you finally found the guy that was able to slay the dragon and get to his first Super Bowl, and he's like the best quarterback potentially that you've ever had. it has to be him, right? So there would be so much pressure on Josh individually and also as a collective to finally bring this organization a Super Bowl. And the same thing for the Commanders, right? While they've been to 5 Super Bowls and they've won 3 already, but the last one hasn't been since 1992, ironically, against the Buffalo Bills in that year. So there'd be a relationship there already between the Bills and the Commanders, previously playing in a Super Bowl already, having the Commanders win that one. There would be that aspect of it. And, you know, what else it could be. And really just more of the same that I've said, right? With the pressure, and both teams, both quarterbacks really would have the hope and joy of every person in their city in the palm of their hand, right? They would control the emotions and just the overall morale of both Buffalo, New York, and Washington, D.C. as well. They would have all those emotions in the palms of their hands, and that just adds so much more than just, you know, what's being played on the field. And that's why I think America's voting for the Bills and the Commanders to play in the Super Bowl. I'm definitely rooting for it. And, you know, if you're the Bills, you ask yourself, how many times are we going to be in this situation, right? Where we beat Lamar, where we beat Patrick, and we didn't even have to play Joe Burrow, right, in these playoffs. Could this be one of the only chances we get of winning a Super Bowl? You'd have to think like that, right? So a lot of the attention and pressure would be on the Bills. And, you know, I think Dan Campbell said it last year in the NFC Championship where they lost in the most dramatic fashion. The Lions did. And after the game, he said, you know, this might be the only time we ever make it here. So those sort of like things and realizations and, you know, statements for a Bills team, I think more so than a lot of these teams, really renders very true when you consider the situation, the journey, and everything like that. How many more opportunities are you going to have at beating the Chiefs, right? This could be the only time you do that. So they'd have to take advantage of it, and that potential Super Bowl, I think, would be absolute cinema if it happened. But it's all a big if, and it's all a big maybe right now on January 23rd. We're going to have all the answers to it next week, but visit me tomorrow when we're really going to go more into each of these matchups when we preview them. But for right now, that is going to be everything for today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media, and making sure to check out both of their YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube, obviously, to see more content around this show regarding the NFL, breaking news, discussions, previews, and everything like that. Especially now around the Super Bowl, it should get a lot more interesting as well. But again, I've been your host, Manny Maradiege, and as a final reminder, join me again tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, where we're going to be previewing both conference championship games and also talking some more about the head coaching news around the NFL.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.